Nick Handley Show as we get into championship weekend of college football. We will know Nebraska's bowl destination officially on Sunday. It is a big weekend as we get into the final normalcy of college football. It's been anything but that earlier in the week, and I'm happy to be talking all about that. The week that was, especially for Nebraska football when it comes to roster management, when it comes to coaching changes, coaching retention in certain instances as well. And oh yeah, by the way, if you were a little surprised how early it happened, because it did come a couple of weeks earlier than it has the last few years, the early signing period where Nebraska came out very strong. In fact, maybe got one surprise there in the 11th hour that they didn't necessarily know they would get. We're going to talk about all of that with Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7 Sports. Schaefer, good afternoon. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm excited to join you on this endeavor, but I do want to say the moving of the signing period up initially, I was like, oh, this is great. You're going to get it out of the way. It's going to be right after the season. Kind of just didn't really think about how that hits with the coaching carousel and the transfer portal. And it's actually been kind of nice. I don't know if I should reveal when we're recording this or when
You
it's
can,
going
yeah,
up.
it's fine because there could be a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
between now and when this is actually released, there could be more departures on the transfer portal.
right, right.
There could be decisions made on certain coaches. So yes, we are recording Thursday at noon. If anybody
Yeah.
wants to know,
So it's basically what I wanted to say. It's been kind of a quiet Thursday morning, which is like, hey, this is sort of nice because between Monday morning until really Wednesday, like at 4 o'clock, we were drinking from a fire hose over at Husker 24/7. And the funny thing is, like, we anticipated or knew that a fair amount of what was going to happen would happen, and yet things just kind of sort of kept happening. And then you just make these phone calls, or in the case of checking in with these sources on Terrence Knighton and Tony White and different transfer portal guys. I mean, you're just constantly either making calls or typing on the computer or checking Twitter/X, and then you look up and it's, oh my gosh, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't even had lunch yet. Like, what is happening here? And Hanley, I don't like missing lunch. I mean, look at me. This is not a guy that misses lunch. But yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
um, because last year I think we applauded the lack of news when it came to the transfer portal. Now, again, you're dealing with essentially an unlimited roster, if you will, compared to getting down to 105. But it was seen as a sign of stability, culture with Matt Rule's team, Shafe. I think this year, as we saw the roster in certain areas that looked improved, but more importantly, that maybe didn't look improved, I think a lot of this turnover, this shakeup, at the end of the day, can actually be a good thing. I'm curious if you would agree with that.
Well, I mean, it always sort of depends on what it's going to look like at the end of it. But I I shouldn't say that I was surprised by the kind of um, panic that I think sort of set in with the fan base. But if you look at like the players that have gone into the portal, there's Makai Bear is really interesting player. I think he's a good player. Jamari Butler, another guy that I've liked a lot. James Williams has had a nice run of things. Those three sort of stand out. Everything else is kind of guys that you might have either expected to go in there or, in the case of Daniel Kalen, like you can understand why, though I still wonder if that's the right decision for him. That kind of thing. It feels like Nebraska is always going to have some players go in. The shakeup with the defensive line feels directly tied to Terrence Knighton. Otherwise, I'm really fascinated because this is all going to come in waves, right? Like this is the first stretch. And then there's going to be more right around that bowl time period. And there's going to be more after Nebraska plays its bowl game. And, it's going to be interesting how the fan base kind of reacts each step of the way. Because I think what a lot of people just want to know right now is like, what is the nucleus of the 2025 team? Who comprises the backbone of Nebraska football? Because you're coming out of this era where you've had Bryce Benhart and Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmaker and Isaac Gifford. And, we didn't know as much about him until he started to play these last couple of years with John Bullock. And you've had all these pieces for this long period of time. And now we're kind of looking at Nebraska football where, this is what it looks like on December 5th at 12:07 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't guarantee that's what it's going to look like on December 6th or 16th or January 2nd or January. You know what I mean? Like, it's just there's a lot of change that's still to come. And I think it's difficult because we don't know yet either in the media, the fans, coaching staff, what that nucleus is yet for Nebraska football. And it's kind of fascinating to be in this point. It feels almost like you don't want to call it a reset or a restart, but it feels in that nature like it could be a dramatically different looking team in 2025 in a variety of ways.
If you were to say what was more, I don't know. I don't want to say the word surprising because, well, I'll explain that here in a moment. But if the more impactful news for Nebraska when it came to the coaches earlier this week, Holgorsen getting the 2-year commitment after the small sample size and what we saw in those 3 games, him committing to Nebraska for 2 years, or the fact that Tony White is no longer the defensive coordinator and is at the same position at Florida State. What was more impactful for this Nebraska team in your opinion?
Yeah, it's unquestionably to me, Dana Holgorsen. And I don't want to take anything away or have this come off like sour grapes because I want to be as upfront as possible. Tony White was definitely a good connection that I had over there on that staff. I mean, that was a guy that very easy for me to talk to when it was just us hanging off to the side at a Nebraska recruiting camp, or when I would run into him, various times or around town, or even at the events that they would have, or even at press conferences. Like, I mean, this was a guy that I thought the world of. But for Nebraska football, Dana Holgorsen, having him come in and be effectively the head of your offense, Matt Rule sort of recognizing that he can't keep going down the route that he was and he needs to put somebody else just in charge of offense, I think was a sign of maturity for him as a coach. I have a lot of trust that Matt Rule will have a defensive coordinator that he can operate with and that Nebraska's defense will be fine, because Matt Rule at heart is a defensive line coach. He's always going to have a good defensive line. He's probably always going to have a good defensive line assistant, even if it's not Terrence Knighton, because he's always had that, because that's at the heart of what he is as a coach. And I think defensively, Nebraska they'll come out of this and they'll be okay. I think Tony White's
I'm with you.
A rocket ship as far as a coach, but Dana Holgorsen's impact and what it means for Nebraska moving forward is a much, much bigger deal and a much bigger conversation than what Tony White was able to do. And I don't want that to come across as anything but a ton of respect for Tony White. It just has more to do with my belief in who Matt Rule is and the type of teams he has, that matching him up with a Dana Holgorsen has a chance to really kind of elevate Nebraska football from where it's been these first 2 seasons.
I'm 100% with you, and I'm glad you brought up it. This is not a situation where it's any type of disrespect towards or devaluing the importance of Tony White. I think we all knew. In fact, I mentioned this earlier in the week, Schaefer, going into the Matt Rule tenure, we were concerned about a lot of areas on that defense. We were wondering if we would see Nash Hutmacher ever fully develop. We were wondering, was Ty Robinson worn down with all of the reps that he was getting? Was he going to have any help up front? And a lot of that you can chalk up to Terrence Knighton as well. But overall, there were a lot of issues defensively, a lot more question marks, and those questions were squashed pretty early in the Tony White era as a defensive coordinator at Nebraska. So I don't think there's anybody that's ever going to say, you know what, Nebraska's better off without him. I think you bring up the best point about that, and that is Matt Rule, his expertise. He knows the line of scrimmage very well, but his expertise is on the defensive side. And he's mentioned that yesterday, he even talked about it, that when he's been a college football coach, both of his defensive coordinators have been Broyles Awards finalists. So he can identify that. He's got, I think, a very solid connection when it comes to, even if we're talking about, who's currently on staff and guys that are still out there that have a connection to Matt Rule that could be interested in this job or that could be a good fit for this job. To me, and I think what you're getting at as well, is there were just 3 games with Dana Holgorsen and with what they were able to do. But I cannot get past the fact that this was, without question, even though the points maybe didn't show it, other than the Wisconsin game, there was production that it is extremely hard to dismiss. That you saw from the quarterback play, from this offense, at least moving the football, and more than anything, Schaefer, having some type of flow that I think this offense just desperately lacked.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the Dana Holgorsen experience was a big success, even if it was just 3 games. I mean, I think that what he was able to bring as a play caller in terms of making the offense run a little more smoothly, efficient. You were able to open up some throwing lanes for Dylan Raiola that weren't there. They were a little aggressive in some regard. All of that speaks to where college football is going anyways. All of that is helpful for your program because it makes it easier to kind of sell yourself as a place to recruit.
Mm-hmm.
Shiny toy and Dylan Raiola, it's a shame if you can't also put an offense in there that allows him to flourish, but also makes it so other people want to come and play in it. When you're grinding out a 14-7 win over Rutgers, or you're only putting up 7 points against Indiana, or even the 17 or 20 that you put up against Ohio State and UCLA, that's not good enough. And people don't look at that offense. I'm not talking to recruits like a Cortez Mills and he's thinking, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to go catch 4 passes for 42 yards against Ohio State and feel like I had no impact on that game. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways that the Dana Holgorsen effect can take shape. But Nick, one of the easiest examples that we have of how quickly he was able to move things in a positive direction. Think about that running game in the first 9 games.
Yeah.
And then how much better it looked. And then even against Iowa, a team that's good defensively, Nebraska was able to run the ball fairly effectively. Honestly, if they could catch it a little bit better, or if Raiola hit Jalen Lloyd at the beginning of that game, I think we're certainly not talking about a world in which Nebraska looks like it's destined for the Pinstripe Bowl. So I came away really impressed with those 3 games.
Yeah, the other part about just the coaching staff right now, and I don't want to say I'm surprised yet, Schaefer, because even Matt Rule yesterday was talking about having so many different things that he's trying to manage and navigate through. When he was asked the timetable of hiring a defensive coordinator, I wasn't surprised with that answer. 2 things that have surprised me, where we stand right now on this Thursday. Again, things might change when when people are actually listening and viewing this. I got to admit, and maybe this will change too, that Marcus Satterfield is cool just stepping back, being the tight ends coach. I thought maybe he was on his way out. Now, again, I understand that there is value in what Dana Holgorsen apparently told Matt Rule as far as the tight end play, that is something that was important to him. That to me is a little surprising. And then the other part is I'm surprised we haven't heard anything about Ed Foley to this point.
Yeah, I think Nebraska is just trying to get through the bowl game with this staff as it currently sits. I think Shorts was a particular hire that they wanted to move forward with. The other thing to kind of remember here is that there might be some guys that they're interested in that are coaching and have bowl games or in situations where, they feel an obligation to kind of finish out the 24 season. And when you already have put that class together, you don't have the big necessity of going out and having to hire your assistants right away. Now, I know you want to have the staff for the transfer portal and everything else, but there's going to be changes, I think, with Nebraska's staff once we get past the bowl season. I don't look for Ed Foley to be on it. I'd be a little surprised if Marcus Satterfield stays. Certainly he wouldn't stay at that number that he's at. So maybe if you restructure, I did find it darkly hilarious, the idea of a Dana Holgorsen offense that largely doesn't utilize tight ends, having a $1.5 million tight end assistant coach. I did get a good laugh out of that, but I think there's changes coming. I think some of it right now is, Rule wanted to get through Wednesday because he wanted to get pen to paper on a lot of those guys. Now you kind of want to assess what's in the portal, what's on your roster. You're still having your ongoing exit interviews with players. I think they have a plan as to what that staff is going to look like. And I think it's going to be several pieces different than what it is right now. And a lot of it is, hey, let's just get through the bowl game. Let's see where we're at. I think it's very likely they're going to be playing on December 28th or December 30th. Those are the dates of the Music City Bowl. It would be the 30th, I believe, and the 28th would be the Saturday that Nebraska would potentially play in the Pinstripe Bowl. And maybe you get some clarity after the bowl gets set and you kind of know what some of these assistant coaches elsewhere are going to do. But yeah, the biggest thing right now is I think they got to go find a defensive line coach. Like, I think if anything's going to get hired before the bowl game, that is the one that seems to stand out to me the most. The other thing is Nebraska might have some assistants who are up for some different jobs. So you might see people leave on their own accord. I don't know that Ed Foley or Marcus Satterfield necessarily fit in that, but they might have opportunities elsewhere. And if you're Matt Rule, you don't want to necessarily push them out if they're going to be moving on their own terms, especially if you don't have something ready lined up for that.
I mentioned this name earlier in the week. Rob Dvorak, his value to the staff, I think, is big. I'm curious, is that a guy that you would be surprised if he's still on staff, or do you expect him to still be?
Well, I expect him to be on staff. I mean, I think he's a big part of what they want. I mean, he did a great job last year in a tough situation. I think about the way that he had John Bullock playing throughout the season, a guy that, was just in his second year at a position, now is getting all of the snaps. He doesn't have Nick Henrich. He doesn't have Luke Reimer. It's John Bullock. And I thought, Nick, I thought he was really kind of co-defensive MVP with Ty Robinson. I felt like those two guys just came up time and time again in big situations, made big plays. I think Rob Dvorak deserves a lot of credit for that. He's a really effective recruiter. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to him in person. He's a genuinely good conversationalist. He's someone that I can see is why he'd be effective with parents or with recruits. I can see why he'd be an effective teacher of football play. So I think it'd be hard for me to envision a staff without him on it. There's a world in which, he's a dark horse, deep candidate that maybe he puts his name in and has some ideas for how he'd want to run things. But I think Matt Rule thinks the world of Rob Dvorak and would like to keep him on staff.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And that's why when it does come to a new defensive coordinator, if it's somebody outside of, well, and you mentioned even Rob Dvorak, I remember having the conversation a year ago when Tony White's name was up for a lot of these different job openings, that we started looking at the staff internally if you wanted to look at continuity. And Rob Dvorak's name, even though it might not have been the number one person on the list, it was in there. And so he's a guy that I think what he's done at that position, and you mentioned that the key part, and we're going to talk about this class in a little bit, is recruiting, and what that linebacking core now looks like too in the 25 class is impressive. And obviously Rob Dvorak has a hand in that. So there's still a lot of question marks with who will still be on this staff, who won't be on this staff, especially after the bowl game. Now you're going to the bowl game regardless of where, or are you staying back?
I won't be going, but I expect both Brunson and BC. If we were driving somewhere, if it was Nashville, I think I probably would be attending it. And I don't know for sure, but everything I have heard is just pinstripe, to the point where I think Nebraska's head coach, Matt Rule, even wants a pinstripe bowl. Northeast guy, familiar. Obviously, you'd have a lot of family over there. So I could see why there'd be value for that for him. I think it's a bad deal for everybody else. Bruns was looking at prices, and I think he was like, I think I paid the same amount to go to Dublin in 2022 is what it's going to cost to try to go to New York City around Christmas. But I think he's mostly just scared of that open air press box on December 28th. So I don't know that either of those guys have warmed up from the Iowa game, and that was an enclosed press box on Black Friday.
Well, you're also talking about two fans of American League teams that don't reside in New York and being in that ballpark too. So I can understand. I know I would not feel great about that either. I mean, that's just.
Do you think it's the ghost of Derek Jeter flipping the ball to get Jeremy Giambi? That
Bruns would freak out.
I think that was in Yankee Stadium when that happened.
And then the news today too that apparently the A's and Luis Severino are coming up with a deal to get done. So Luis Severino being part of the
Yeah.
of the Oakland Athletics. Like, come on. So, I mean, Brunson needs to get over that a little bit, I
The
guess.
Sacramento A's.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. What am I talking about? The Oakland A's here. Oh my gosh. I know that's
Do
going
they
to take
just
a
call them the
while.
Sac A's?
The Sac A's. I like that.
Can we just call them the Sacks?
Oh, yeah. I mean, eventually we will. Eventually we
and
will.
then they're going to go to Vegas by the time we get comfortable with it. But
yeah. Are you in full, by the way, for people who are new to Schaefer and I's interaction, we are both long-suffering Cleveland, formerly Indian fans, now Guardian fans. Have you gone full into the Ian of the Guards? Are you calling them fully the Guardians, or are you still just referring to them as the Guards or Cleveland?
I think informally I refer to them as the Guards,
Okay.
or sometimes the Guardiac Kids,
Oh,
because
I
they
like
have a
that.
tendency to
Yeah.
come back from deficits. But yeah, I mean, I adapted to it pretty easily because if you watch enough games or you listen to Tom Hamilton or you always hear it, like
Mhm.
it kind of just was easy for me. I think the difficulty I have is when it's a team that I don't really think a lot about. Like
Mhm.
I will call them the San Diego Chargers and not think twice about it,
Yeah.
like it's, or, drop the Washington Redskins or whatever it is and not think about it because, it's just right there. So, but I feel like when it's your team and you're immersed in the coverage and you're reading it or listening to it, it's a little bit easier to just sort of like slide into what it is. But Let's Go Guards works for me just as well as
Yeah.
anything else. And as you well know, and I think you're similar, certainly wasn't my choice of a team name.
Nope.
But I chose him for Albert Bell, and when he left, I stuck
Yeah.
around. And when Manny Ramirez left, I stuck around. And when Jim Thome left, I stuck around. And when Homar Vizquel got pushed out, I stuck around. So you switching from Indians to Guardians, I was still going to stick around. I'm diseased. Handley. No other fan base wants me.
Well, there's been, at least you have your Vikings right now, because there has been
We know how that ends. We know how that ends.
Well, you got to have faith, my man. Come on. Even
it's
the Cubs won a World Series.
You got to enjoy the journey. This is what I tell people. This is what I tell Nebraska fans. It's not always the destination. The journey has to matter too, because if you don't enjoy any of it, what's the point?
Yeah.
Your team wins a championship and you didn't enjoy any of the journey. You're just celebrating the last game. That's not fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, in 2024, if you are a team that Nick Handley roots for, you have had a really bad way of things. Now, Cleveland making it to the postseason was unexpected, in my opinion, so that was kind of nice. But the way that they lost in heartbreaking fashion, the Chicago Bears were supposed to be better this year. They're pulling off history where they're firing a coach midseason, which the McCaskies have never done. At least I guess UNO hockey did finally get to the Frozen face-off in their conference tournament and had a nice showing, making it all the way to the championship game there. So that was nice, but they're off to a little bit of uneven start here to end 2024. And then Nebraska. In fact, watching Nebraska on Saturdays and Bears on Sunday has been almost like Groundhog Day. So it's been, at least the last couple of months, it's been kind of rough to watch sports teams that I root for.
That was the 2023 for me. Just how is this team going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory week in and week out? Vikings on Sunday, Bears on, or excuse me, not Bears, never Bears.
Boy, I knew you always had it in you.
I mean, I was rooting for him on Thanksgiving.
Well, yeah.
I was like, hey, it'd be really nice to score a touchdown here with about 4 seconds left. Give the Lions their second loss. But they had other plans. And I want to say this. I think it was Zadarius Smith. He was completely offside. Like, how do you not call that?
Yeah, I was so confused in that play.
The false start, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't care. You just because you missed one call doesn't mean you have to miss the next one. The guy was like halfway through the neutral zone while the ball was being snapped.
Yeah. He was ready to receive the snap. You're right. But I think everybody was so dumbfounded on how they were managing the clock in that entire minute, not even the last 30 seconds, too.
You're right,
so.
yeah.
Well,
clock management's a thing that Nebraska football can work on as well.
Exactly. There are a lot of those things. There's a lot of similarities when it comes to watching both of those teams. So yesterday was early signing day, 20 out of 20 that Nebraska gets. Now, it did seem like they might lose out on, at least based on the trends. And I didn't know if you were getting that as well when it came to I'm totally blanking out his name now. Jeremiah Jones, right?
Yeah. Well, so the Jeremiah Jones situation is pretty fascinating. And At one point, Nebraska felt like they had completely lost him. He was going to go somewhere else. And then Matt Rule was able to get on the phone, and kind of just, again, pitched his vision for Jeremiah Jones, his vision for Nebraska. And there's a reason why he had committed to Nebraska back in, I want to say, late June, early July.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a reason that he reaffirmed it over Missouri, who was kind of the team that was wreaking havoc on Wednesday. But he got a little spooked because of some of the coaching changes and a report that went out there about Garrett McGuire, who's done a fantastic job recruiting in the 2025 class. And I think he was a little spooked about what it was going to look like. And Matt Rule was able to kind of take care of that. And so, yeah, there was I put out a story early on Wednesday. Hey, it doesn't look like they're going to get Jeremiah Jones. Get a text while I'm eating lunch. And now it looks like they're going to get Jeremiah Jones. And then Matt Rule announces it during his press conference about an hour later. So it was quite the cycle for that guy. But he is someone that, you hope he sticks at a place like Nebraska. There's a lot of talent there. Yeah. It is a deal where he could play a number of different positions. Nick, I watched this guy walk in with a 2026 offensive lineman that's a 4-star, well-regarded in the industry. And Jeremiah Jones is as big as that guy. And yet he's playing safety in his high school. He's a potential rover. He could be an edge. He could be a 3-tech defensive lineman. Mm-hmm. He could be a tight end. He could be a wide receiver. He could be an inside linebacker. It's fun when you have a projectable player like that. I think he wants to try the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
I think Nebraska's more than happy to tell him whatever. Ultimately, they're going to get him in the factory and see, what comes of it. But he's one of those early enrollees. It's going to be a lot of fun to see what he's doing in the spring.
If I said Isaiah Mosey, Cortez Mills, and Dawson Merritt most likely to have an impact as true freshmen, would you add to that list? Would you subtract to that list?
I would add 2 names to that list. Okay. One in particular, the other a little banged up, so we don't know. I would add Jamarian Parker, the running back. I would add Connor Booth as a running back. Okay. I think Nebraska's running back situation, people were excited about how the year ended with Emmett Johnson and Dante Dowdell. I think Nebraska can continue to try to get better at the running back spot, whether that be the portal or whether it's these freshmen. And I believe that they're both going to have the opportunity to kind of put their name on that position too. I don't think anyone's job is etched in stone for 2025. And as good as Emmett Johnson finished the year and excited as people are, Jamarian Parker, who averaged over 10 yards a carry, a real home run hitter, if you're able to have that element in the offense, maybe he's not going to get the ball more than a handful of times a game. But if he can flip it with a 49-yard run, if he can rip off a 60-yard touchdown, I mean, one of the problems that Nebraska's running game has had in all of these years, they don't have home run hitters. Since Divine Ozigbo, you just don't have guys who are finishing off big runs. And you'd like to see that. Like, every drive just felt like it was a battle. And, for Nebraska, it was either you're getting the random 17-yard run or like 8 carries of 3 yards. There was no in between. And then with Dana Holgorsen, you saw a little bit more, okay, here's 6 yards, there's 8 yards, making it a little bit easier. But you still want that home run. You still want a guy who can finish off a big run, because that changes the complexion of a game. And it doesn't have to be every week, but if you have someone that can hit on a 42-yard touchdown run, that's 42 yards that you don't have a false start or a turnover or a sack, or that you have to go get. You don't have to kick the field goal. We don't have to worry about the snap being on the ground. It's stupid because it's so simple sounding, but having the home run threat, just like it for the Cleveland Guardians in 2024, it makes you a better team.
Doesn't it ever?
If you can get the points in a hurry, they can't take them away from you.
You had to go there. Hey, I love how you tied it back to that, though, because obviously that was a element that was missing.
Nothing if not a masochist.
Yeah. I've never accused you to be anything but that. With the teams that we root for.
Gluttonous for punishment. That's me with sports.
That's so very true. This class, I know last year in the 2024 class, it's going to be considered to be a potential game changer for Matt Rule based on, I think, just because we saw a lot of them. 2, maybe 3 guys in particular. 2 guys, though, especially because we saw them every game, and that was Ja'Cory Barney, but especially Dylan Raiola. I would say maybe 3 guys when I'm thinking again of the offensive side of the football, of Carter Nelson. When you think of the 2025 class, the significance of this class, and I think of what stands out is what they did at the linebacking position as well. What the importance is clearly significance of this group being able to develop into what Matt Rule wants to see them. But how do you think this one, from its depth, the potential anyway? I know that's what it's all about, is the potential depth of this class compared to 2024 would be what to you, Shafe?
Well, it starts for me. I like a lot of what they did with the kind of your front seven look on defense. I mean, all six of these guys are players that I have a lot of hope for. Two of them are big names in Dawson Merritt and Christian Jones, and then you have Malcolm Simpson, who's a top 24/7 guy, top 200 and I think he was like 222nd in the country or whatever it was in the rankings. And then in addition to those, you have Pierce Mooberry, who never gets talked about, but was having a fantastic season for Millard North before he got hurt. And then two defensive linemen that, depending on who's doing the evaluation, could easily have been 4-stars. And Cade Peterzak from North Dakota, who's just farm strong, doesn't talk, is going to do all of his talking with basically just smashing quarterbacks into the dirt and wrapping up running backs. That's a guy that I think has a little bit of the Riley Van Poppel, could play early. We could see him be a special player down the line. And then Tyson Terry, who's in that same mold, who we already know does his talking on the wrestling mat, is a great interview in addition to everything else, but is a winner. I mean, that's one of the things that stands out to me about a guy like Tyson Terry. He wins. Even Omaha North, where, the football has been kind of up and down in the last couple of years, that guy is just playing his butt off. He's putting them. He's a good leader. I think he's a guy that can help in the interior of that defense, hopefully as soon as 2025, but more likely at 26, 27, let him develop, body-wise. Same for Peterzak, same for Simpson. But I love what they have up front there. And I think a guy like Mooberry could be a really special player down the line too. So that group of six, and then I love what they have on the offensive line too. I mean, I think in both of these cases, I like it a little bit more than what we saw the year before. And so, really it feels like they built in the trenches. I think the 2024 class with Ja'Cory Barney and Carter Nelson, you had some really intriguing kind of pass catchers there. With what they did at quarterback, you're kind of setting yourself up with some skill players and skill position. But for me, the trenches are really kind of what stand out in this 2025 group. I really like what you have up front offensively. Sean Hammerbeck, Juju Marks. You have two tackle candidates there that are really interesting. Brian Tapp, who's a developmental offensive lineman. Houston Kahana Torres could be your starting center here in a couple years. I love getting linemen from the islands. I like kind of the nasty version that I think he can bring. So what they have there up front on both sides of the ball coming out of this class, I think is really the backbone of what everything else is built around it. I would have loved to have seen maybe a higher end defensive back kind of in this class, or even another higher end wide receiver if you could have gotten a Michael Terry. But for the most part, where they built with this class are guys that I think are going to be here long term, and guys that I think could be pretty good players in a short amount of time. What's fascinating is there's not as many immediate impact players in my mind, but there's a lot of guys that I think could win a bunch of football games should Nebraska continue in this direction.
I agree. I was inundating myself for the last couple of weeks of some of the highlight films, and I understand they're highlights. They don't always show the lowlights, but Peterzak's strength, but even Hammerbeck, there was one highlight where they were lining him up in the backfield, kind of like what we saw with Ty Robinson, and he literally pushed the entire side of that defensive front away. Like his Hammerbeck's strength was pretty notable too. I don't know what the competition looked like in that particular highlight.
Right.
But my God, that was still pretty impressive.
So I jokingly refer to him as offensive line Nash Hutmaker. Yeah. Even though he doesn't have that wrestling background, he's from a small South Dakota town where he's got this like folklore about like how strong he is and how big he is and the type of athlete that he is. I believe he's a basketball player and does track. And I just think a guy like that, you get him in your system, you build him up, and then you turn them loose. I mean, these are the sort of kids that Nebraska has always been built on. We can always talk about the great skill players that have come in from California and Florida and those 90s teams, but you had to have big ass, strong, tough lineman.
Yep.
And that's what I think a Sean Hammerbeck is. And he's someone that, maybe gets overlooked a little bit, but I guarantee come Super Six time, people are going to have him in there because you're going to turn the film on and you're just going to see, 6'7", small South Dakota town, kind of rocks a mullet every now and then. I'm on board with this kid.
Rule said yesterday that the guys they bring on scholarship, and especially now more than ever with the 105 number, are guys that they project to be NFL type players. If you were to say now, and some of those guys, maybe it's hard for the naked eye to see that now because a lot of these bodies are still developing, and a lot of just their overall skill set at that level to be successful is developing. But if you look at guys right now, and I'm sure we've talked about a handful of these guys right now that you say, yeah, that as long as you stay healthy, as long as that trajectory continues both developmental wise from physical strength to knowledge of the game, who do you think could really pop out of this class if they're a next level type guy?
Well, I mean, pretty much all the names that I mentioned have that kind of ability. I'm going to try to think if there's somebody that's maybe a little bit of a deeper cut or that we probably don't give as much run to. Obviously at a place like Nebraska right now, we talk a lot about Dylan Raiola, but there will be a day where he's not here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think TJ Lateef is a really intriguing quarterback.
I'm glad you brought him up because people are now wanting to know more about him because right now he might be the only other scholarship quarterback on the roster.
Right. And so he's a guy that had a nice senior season. He was someone that I think a lot of teams liked, but I don't know that they were just, at the point of saying this is the only quarterback in our class. Texas wanted him to be the second quarterback in a class. Colorado was recruiting him, but he was a little bit further down the list for Deion Sanders, and they ended up bringing in an absolute stud at Colorado. And so TJ Lateef's a guy that I think gets forgotten about a little bit in this class. Caden Vermoss is a guy that gets forgotten about too. And he was the first commitment in the class. He's an intriguing defensive back. He's someone that I think is an immediate special teams player, whether as a return man or for me, I want to see that guy as a gunner. I want to see that guy on punt coverage. I want to see that guy on kick coverage. I want to see him running down there, hair on fire, because that's the only way he knows how to play and, have an impact that way. I mean, I think a guy like that could be really, really helpful. Tanner Turch, same thing. I think we're going to see with Rex Guthrie when he's able to get his opportunity. That's the same kind of player out of Colorado that Nebraska cannot believe aren't getting any local looks and are sort of just because Colorado doesn't recruit locally. There's not a lot of schools that just come into the Denver area because they don't really know what the talent is there. And if you don't see the local offers and, you're kind of tracking off of what Kansas State and Iowa State are doing, Nebraska basically looks at it like, hey, it's not really our home state, but this is a big metro area where we can get some talent. And they like what Tanner Turch and Rex Guthrie can be as developmental guys. And Rex was 24 and Tanner in the 25 class. They're both really interesting. They come from the same school, their heritage in Colorado that has produced some pretty good players.
Schaefer, I want to shift our focus to the departures that we know of now. And again, for people who are checking this out, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. So what we know now obviously could change by the time you see or are listening to this and you're saying, hey, well, why didn't you bring so-and-so up? The most recent was Kai Wallen last night. But anybody that stood out to you that either surprised you or you think, damn, that's a big miss? Or that not even a big miss, but that one's going to hurt a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think James Williams is a guy that even if it's a niche player, I mean, his pass rushing skills is going to be valuable no matter where he's at. I think he could have a very nice end of his season or end of his career run wherever he ends up. I think it's going to be Florida State. I think everybody expects it to be Florida State, but he's one where I think it hurts a little bit because you found him. I mean, nobody else wanted him, and he is going to be an intriguing player in that regard. I loved what Jamari Butler brought from a leadership standpoint, how hard he worked. It's unfortunate that one's not going to finish with him as a career Husker. And then, we mentioned Mekhi Bayer. I mean, those are the kind of the primary ones. There's still a lot of guys that I think are going to be making decisions, but if I had to rank them, I would probably have James Williams as my number one. for in terms of where it hurts the most. Mekhi Bayer probably 2, and then Jamari Butler 3.
Yeah, I'm with you on Bayer. James Williams, I 100% agree with you. Just how he's developed in the 2 years in Nebraska and seeing his effectiveness, his snap count, but just the way that he's utilized in the snaps that he's gotten has been very effective. Mekhi Bayer was a little bit surprising to me from the standpoint of what this linebacking group is going to look like next year. You're losing guys. You're bringing in a lot of younger players, but they are young and experienced. I thought Mekhi Bayer could be one of those anchors. And he was fairly productive over the last couple of years. That one to me, I thought hurt and was a little bit of a surprise. I want to ask you, not because we're surprised. I think all of us assumed this was going to happen. It's just a matter of when. Is Danny Kaelin? First of all, I don't know if a guy could handle the situation that he found himself in better than what Danny Kaelin did. We don't know what that year, just learning the college game itself, will do to him. But I know that there were a lot of good things said, even mid-season, about Danny Kaelin and what he was doing on scout team and whatnot. Where do you think he winds up as far as the level and the type of team that could utilize him? I mean, he was a commit to Missouri before he decommitted. Is he still at that level, or do you think there's still that type of value with a guy like Danny Kaelin?
When that one happened, it made me wonder if someone had already gotten in his ear about a location or a spot where he could come in and compete. I'm assuming he's going to try to go somewhere to get a starting job. The hard thing for me is that he has no film. He's never taken a game rep. You only are operating off of what he did in the spring game and practice and controlled environments. Otherwise, you have to go back to Class A. And no matter where he goes, he's going to have to compete for that job. And he was in a really strong situation of being the backup quarterback for Dylan Raiola, where, it's not the way anybody wants to think about it, but you're one play away from being a starter. You're one play away from starting potentially multiple games. Yeah. Dylan Raiola had done something that we hadn't seen very often, where he managed to start all 12 games at Nebraska. That's not in recent history. That's somewhat unusual. And so I wonder if Kaelin just felt like it wasn't a fit with Dana Holgorsen. I wonder if he was tired of just always being in Dylan Raiola's shadow, as he was throughout his entire recruitment. I wonder if there's an opportunity for him where someone's like, hey, come here and compete. I have a hard time imagining he's going to go to a Power 4 school and step into a starting role. But maybe there's somewhere where he's going to go and he feels like he's able to compete to the level that he wants. I wonder if there's a Group of 5 school that's a good fit for him. I don't think he'd need to drop all the way down to the FCS level. But no matter where he goes, he's going to have to compete, and he's going to have to prove that he can play at a high level. And I think he can do it. I really like Danny. I think he was really valuable for Nebraska's 2024 class and keeping things going in that direction. And a guy like Ja'Cory Barney, if you didn't have Daniel Kaelin coming down from Omaha for his official visit, I don't know if Nebraska's getting him. And then he had a lot of confidence that, before Dylan Raiola was ever in the class, Daniel Kaelin was Danny Dimes to a lot of those recruits. And so, I hope the best for him. It's a shame that it just didn't work, where he wasn't willing to either wait, or Nebraska wasn't willing to see if he could develop. I don't know which of it is, and I don't want to pretend like I do, because I think it's important to know there's always two sides to all of these stories.
We're going to do a little rapid fire on some of the college football conference championship games here in just a moment, but I do want to take a couple of nuggets from yesterday's press conference with Matt Rule. First of all, are you okay with the explanation, the pregame explanation of why the captains maybe didn't shake hands? Now, I know he reiterated that's not what they do, or that's not what they should do, but I felt like he explained maybe a little too much of the why, where it came off as an excuse. Because I said this earlier in the week when I was talking to Evan Bland, if you're going to pull that, you sure shit better win. And they didn't win. It was a bad look. I felt like there was a little too much explaining of why they might have done that, as opposed to, yeah, that's unacceptable, it'll never happen again.
Where I come down from this is I don't care that it happened. I don't even know that I felt like I needed Matt Rule to explain it, because whatever the reasons were, people were going to try to pick it apart anyways. And the only people that know why they did what they did are the 4 that were on the field. And they chose that route, and it didn't bother me in the slightest, because it's not Little League football or Little League baseball, and we don't have to pretend like you've been around the environment. We don't have to pretend like it's a glowing display of sportsmanship every time some dudes get together and slap hands after a sporting event.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times they're not even saying the word good game. It's yeah, good game. Whatever. Like we don't have to pretend the sanctity of the sport is at risk here. And when we saw Michigan and Ohio State play out, we also don't have to pretend like what Nebraska did was this glowing, massive mistake of a football program. So I didn't think he even needed to explain anything, but I didn't have any issue with it in the moment. I didn't have any issue with the explanation. Hopefully we can all move forward. If it adds another chapter of hate to Iowa in the rivalry, I think that's good. Yeah. I think it's good these teams hate each other. I don't want them to like each other. I don't believe in mutual respect of that nature. I very much want this game to be a hard-hitting affair where the teams don't like each other, but I would rather they not shake hands than a bunch of cheap shots like the Houston Texans pulled off on Trevor Lawrence, or just
plant some flags. Just start planting flags everywhere.
I'd rather have it built on a mutual disrespect or disliking of each other than just straight made up stories like Shedeur Sanders brought to the table in 2023. So, I mean, there's a lot worse things that it could be than not shaking hands before the snap. I also think Iowa's linebacker needs to maybe tone the rhetoric down some. If you're going to go play in the NFL, you might need to put some big boy pants on before you get drafted.
Yeah, that was a lighten up Francis moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, so
agreed.
That's just kind of where I come down on it, though. But I loved when the Iowa kicker blew kisses after he made the field goal, a few years ago. Like I think that's good for the game, for the matchup of these two teams.
That's what you did when you struck out a Norfolk batter.
No, I was just doing the pistol guns like I was. Yeah, exactly. It's really hard to do with a glove. I had to take that off and then do it, and then pick the glove back up, and then get the ball from my third baseman.
Shooter. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah. Also, and then we'll get to these games here in just one sec. The reason I said the second scholarship quarterback on the roster is it was officially brought up because I think this is always going that direction, that they were going to try to work out Heinrich Harberg at different positions. And Matt Rule mentioned if he wants a chance to play at the next level in the NFL. In your opinion, just from an athletic standpoint, if they find a fit, could we see Heinrich Harberg on a Sunday afternoon in one of the various stadiums, and maybe even against the team that we root for, or playing for one of our beloved teams?
Yeah, I don't know. The Taysom Hill comparison is always hard because I don't know that he runs like Taysom Hill, and he's certainly not as big as Taysom Hill, but he's such an athlete that I think you owe it to yourself to figure out how you can utilize him. I love the idea in the 105-man era of getting maximum value out of a player. I don't want to take credit for it. I believe it was Nate Klaus who even threw out the idea, hey, let him try long snapping. Let's see where it ends with Heinrich Harberg. Because he's such an athlete and he has so much speed. And I feel like he is a home run hitter in his own right, where if you call the right play, if he gets the right lane, that guy's going to go 60, 70 yards. You know how we know this? He's done it. We've seen him do it. Yep. So I love the idea of trying to maximize that value. I was always fascinated by him as a quarterback because he has very loud tools. Like people are going to dispute this, but if you watched him play, he has an absolute cannon of an arm. Mm-hmm. What I wanted to see was the development as a quarterback, and I don't know that he's really ever got, Glenn Thomas this year is the most that he's really kind of had. And we saw an overhauled, cleaner mechanics from him. I would love to have seen if he could have had more time with that, but he's such an athlete. Get the value where you can. Have him in the pocket as an emergency quarterback if you need it. And, see what he can do as a tight end or as a wide receiver or as a gadget play guy, as a wildcat quarterback. Don't lose any of that, but maybe lean into it a little bit more. He's such an athlete and he cares so much about Nebraska that I think he's a value add in so many ways that I'm excited to see it. And if he can parlay it into being Taysom Hill or Blake Bell or whoever we want to use as an example, I'm all for that too, because that's fun.
That is fun.
We spend so much time talking about football in such serious tones. We forget sometimes it's supposed to be fun. And watching a guy run a gadget play or do something unique, that's great. they damn near hit on that Ja'Cory Barney pass. I mean,
Yep.
the deep one, that the one time he threw all year, you kept waiting. When is he going to throw? When is he going to throw? When is he going to throw? And of course, just like everything else in that game, it was close, but no cigar.
Yeah. All right. Let's do some. We're going to call our shot here. We're going to start for tomorrow night, the Mountain West Championship. And normally I wouldn't care about the Mountain West Championship game. No disrespect to the Mountain West, but it does have the best running back in the country that will be showcased.
And a playoff team.
Yeah, exactly. So we're
and a
talking
potential bye playoff team.
Could host Ashton Gentry, Boise State taking on UNLV. Boise State is a 4-point favorite. Are you going with Boise State in this?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Boise State. I feel like they were the one that broke the mold by getting into that game against Oklahoma. It should be fitting that they would be the one that is the first to host, or the first as a top 4 seed, as a group of Group 5 program. I mean, obviously Cincinnati did it here recently, different circumstances. Give me Boise.
Okay, I'm with you too on that one. Tulane hosting Army in the AAC championship game. I know Army's been kind of the darling story this year, but Tulane is actually a slight 3.5-point favorite.
Yeah, I am going to go with Army because Tulane's head coach, John Summerall, is being courted by North Carolina, and I think that's always difficult. Yep. And I always think it's hard when you get to play Army, and they're 11-1. They don't get talked about, but they're 11-1.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. Okay, we got to disagree at some point, but I'm all for our armed forces. I'm for our armed forces, man, and they have been a great story. Love the way that they run. Okay, Big 12 championship game, Iowa State, Arizona State. I'm curious where you're at on this one because this could be a little bit of a coin flip. I'll start on this one because Arizona State is a 2-point favorite. I'm going to go with the Fighting Matt Campbells and Iowa State, though. I like the way they played as of late. I thought that they were solid out of the gate. They had a little bit of a lull in the middle because their schedule didn't really allow them for us to see how good they are. I like Iowa State winning this one.
I am going to agree with you on this one as well. I like Iowa State as well. I thought Iowa State at times was the best team in the Big 12. I am a little sad. I wanted to see Colorado in this position because I like the idea of seeing Colorado in the playoff. It has nothing to do with Deion Sanders. It has everything to do with I want as much Travis Hunter exposure as I can get. He probably played his last game with Colorado. I doubt he plays in a bowl game.
Okay. We're going to get a rematch in the SEC championship game between Georgia and Texas. It is the Longhorns, a slight favorite, even though they lost 30-15. Schaefer, is it going to be impossible to beat a team like that twice, or does Georgia just have Texas's number?
Georgia's kind of a weird team because I don't think they've figured out how to stay consistent. I think they can get up for some games and then they come in sleepy on other ones. I think they'll be up for it in the SEC championship. I think they're going to give Texas a big fight, but I think the Longhorns come out as winners.
Okay, I'm taking
a close game, and I think it's like a down to a field goal. I think it's the game of the day, but I'm going to take Texas here.
I'm going to take the Dogs in this one. Big Ten championship game, Oregon, Penn State, Lucas Oil Stadium. This is great. It's going to be a CBS game too. You do have the Ducks as a slight 3.5-point favorite. I am rolling with Oregon. I think they were kind of lying in the weeds, winning games, not looking all that impressive until they had that big victory over Ohio State. I love Oregon, and hey, I'm not going against history. We know what James Franklin has yet to accomplish in these moments. So how do you not go with Oregon, right?
Because you go with Penn State,
totally
upset that nobody saw coming. Nobody thinks Penn State is going to win this game. Nobody thinks James Franklin can win big games. Nobody thinks Oregon's going to lose before the playoff. So it's a perfect recipe. Why not blow this up before the playoff starts? You have a shocking result like this. Penn State wins. What are you going to do? Do you put them at number 1? Do they jump Texas? If Texas beats Georgia, are they number 1? Does it really matter because you're getting a bye either way? Did anyone see Penn State winning the Big Ten in the first year of the college football playoff? No.
And we talked about it. This was going to be a great thing for Penn State. They'd finally be out of the East Division and they could do their own thing. So I see what you're getting at here.
Yeah, so give me the Nittany Lions shocking everyone with a big win this time, and they are about to lay the biggest egg in the playoff. Once they win the Big Ten title, they will get upset.
So within a week's time of James Franklin's stock skyrocketing, it'll come right back down.
Well, they'll get that bye. They'll have that bye, so they won't have to play in week 1.
Yeah.
But everyone will be all fired up. They'll probably be, I don't know, we'll say they're in Arizona. They're at the Fiesta Bowl.
Uh-huh.
There's so much enthusiasm and excitement. Iowa State comes in as a heavy underdog,
love it.
and Matt Campbell shocks the world
I love it.
with a win.
I could really see that actually happening too. Final one, ACC championship, Clemson, SMU. I know when you think ACC football, you think SMU Mustangs. It is.
You know how many
SMU
times
is a
I've had to
slight
look up to
2.5
see? I
see
keep
where they're
putting them
at?
in the Big 12. I keep putting them in the Big 12.
I did actually earlier in the year. I did the exact same thing because they feel like if they're anything, they're a Big 12 team. They're a slight 2.5 point favorite. I'm going to roll with SMU. I think they're going to finish this thing out.
Yeah, well, you know, if there is a just world, we get Iowa State and SMU both win and then play each other. I don't know if you've seen their athletic directors have been snipping back and forth.
Yep.
And so I feel like we need that matchup to somehow happen where they get to play each other and then the winner gets Penn State. That's how I feel about it. But I'm actually going to go Clemson here. I think Clemson's got the better team. I think that SMU has benefited from a pretty favorable Indiana level schedule for their run in the ACC. They didn't play Georgia Tech. They didn't play Clemson. They didn't play Miami. So give me Clemson here in a win that I think knocks SMU out of the playoff. Like, I don't think they will stay in.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. If they lose, then I think they're donezo. So
yeah.
Okay. I will leave you with this, or our viewers and listeners with this too, because Mike Schaefer is a Columbus native. I spent 7 years of my life in Columbus. People always want to know, and I know there's one guy that is still in our world. He used to be a scribe, but now he just does bigger and better things all over the place. And Dirk Chatlin, I think we would all agree that the Godfathers in Columbus is the very best that you will find. The question, and I know Matt Rule does a good job of describing and explaining the why. People want to know, Schaefer, why is that the case? Why is the Godfathers in Columbus just better than everyone else?
It's like impossible to explain, but it's just something about it. It tastes better. Like there's just something that they do. And I'm told that they do everything by the book. And I've had people tweet at me that work for Godfather's corporate, and they're like, it's just a exemplary organization. They don't have any special sauce or anything. I don't know. Maybe their pizza ovens are just even better than the ones that are anywhere else. But there's something about the Columbus Godfathers. And I'm telling you, it has nothing to do that it's from Columbus. I'm not sitting here talking about the Columbus McDonald's or the Columbus Amigos or whatever it is. There is a quality difference between that Godfathers and what you can get in Lincoln or Omaha or anywhere else. And if you are in Columbus and you don't eat either at Gluer's or at Godfathers, I feel like you're making a little bit of a mistake. Sure, there's Dusters and there's Husker House and all these other places.
Yes.
They're great. They are. If you're going multiple times, you get them then. If you're just going to be there one time, Gluer's or Godfathers. Those are your choices.
And then, of course, go to Godberg and have a root beer float when it gets warmer out too. Because
Triple G it.
Yes, that's right. You're right. You're right. Schaefer, as always, appreciate our time together. Enjoy this weekend's festivities of college football, the playoffs. Very happy holidays to you and your lovely family. Did Hudson visit Santa yet?
Hudson has not visited Santa. I've been informed that Santa is arriving at his daycare tomorrow.
Okay.
So I don't know how that'll go. His dad is fat with a beard, so I assume that he will like Santa as much as he likes his dad. So
excellent, my man. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you very, very soon. Be well.
Thanks for having me on, Nick.